Oh, yes, it's here. Weather's going to be great again. We made it through another winter. For me, that's kind of why I'm way more aware of when the vintage changes for rosés than others, because there's that kind of like stark, stop and then the promise of balmy days to come.
Hello! Welcome to The Corner Table, a podcast about food and drink in Madison, produced by the Capital Times. The lakes have thawed and there's rain in the forecast, so it must be spring. I drink pink wine all year round, but when we can see the start of summer just a couple of long weeks away, I love it even more. And lucky for us, finding great rosé has never been easier. Not insipid white Zinfandel and not bone-dry rosé that sucks your mouth dry, but beautiful, balanced, fresh rosés that seem tailor-made for right now. I am Lindsay Christians, food writer for the Capital Times, and on this week's episode, I spoke with my friend Bob Hemauer, who is a partner at Cork and Bottle on East Johnson. He knows his way around rosé. I predict after this episode, we may all have a few more bottles to try. Enjoy! Hello, Bob. Welcome.
Hey, Lindsay, how are you?
I am doing great, and I am super ready for spring.
You and me both.
So you've got rosés here today.
I do. It's the first. It's like the first robin of spring. It's the rosé season is upon us.
I don't even care if it snows after that. Like, so long as I have rosé, it will feel like spring.
I will say this. I have a firm belief that rosé season exists in one's mind. So I will drink rosé in December, and I will drink it, with Thanksgiving. And I love rosé all year round because, again, it's not a seasonal thing. It's a state of mind for me, and I encourage others to adopt that philosophy.
When I was a lowly wine clerk, and people would ask me about how rosé was made, I would tell them so confidently that rosé is made from the juice that comes off of red grapes without letting it sit on the skins to give it lots of color. But I have since learned that there are several ways to make rosé, and one of them is, in fact, blending red wine and white wine. So
it's true. First
question I have for you today is, how is rosé made?
Well, you have alluded to it. It's rosé is not. All rosé does is describe the color, and there's a lot of different ways that you can make a pink wine. You can, like you said, blend two different grapes together. You can, blend a red and a white wine that's already been fermented and they're made, and you just kind of blend them and bottle them, and then that'll make a pink wine. Those can be really great depending on the producer and how, what sort of thoughts put into it. But generally, the higher quality rosés are made of, one of two ways. One, which is the way that you described it. You make red wine, and then you bleed off, Saignée method bleeding. You bleed off some of the juice after it's only been macerating on the skins for a very short amount of time. And that can make some really compelling, delicious, rosés. I think a lot of Provence rosés that from producers, especially like in that $10 to $15 range, I think that's a way that you can have those kind of quality wines at that price level. It's because it is just kind of a natural byproduct of quality winemaking. And the other way is to make the deliberate decision in the vineyard to pick at the particular right time to make a delicious, light-bodied, rosé. With anything with wine, it's all what's in the glass. I don't think there's one method that would make necessarily a more compelling rosé. Although, the thinking is that if you pick for rosé and you make the rosé from those grapes, that was a deliberate decision made from bud break through harvest into the cellar. And so the idea is that would be a higher expression. But then again, if you just have a bunch of really not that great grapes, then it's not going to make great wine. So again, like with anything, we've said it before when we've talked, it's like not having absolute beliefs when it comes to wine and really trusting what's in the glass and, trusting who you buy it from the kind of the keys to navigating it.
You mentioned vintage, and it does change vintage to vintage. One of the reasons I've always loved Rosé is because I feel like I get that vintage variation, but I get it so like, oh, I can tell the difference between a 2015 and a 2017. Isn't this awesome? But also, the new vintage of Rosé, when it comes out in the spring, is a big deal. And it seems to me like it's a bigger deal than when white wines come out, like
Totally.
the new 2017s of white wine. And I wonder if you can why is that?
Well, I think it's a couple different things. One, white wine it's typically kept in stock more, both at the distributor and the retail and the winery level. I mean, all three of those levels. With Rosé, the old saw is that no one wants to be holding that last case of Rosé on September 30th, right? Like when the season's over, and then people stop drinking it. Although that's really changing too. But what that means is distributors, retailers, et cetera, are willing to, let Rosé go out of stock. Partly because, the demand really softens when the weather gets colder, but, also partly because they're generally Rosé is not a high volume production for any given winery, so they run out. The wineries run out, and then the distributors run out, then the retailers run out. So by the time we get to February, there aren't a ton left. We at the shop we really try to keep 12, 15 Rosés in the shop year round and then expand it when it gets warmer. But it's tough because there isn't a ton to buy. So I think the thing is, like, when they start coming out, it's like, oh, yes, it's here. Weather's going to be great again. We made it through another winter. And I think for me, that's kind of why I'm way more aware of when the vintage changes for Rosés than others, because there's that kind of like stark, stop and then the promise of balmy days to come.
What did you bring today?
Oh, I brought two of my favorites. Number one we're going to try is from the folks at Ostatu. This is a Rioja Alavesa producer. They've had these vineyards in their family for like 5 or 6 generations, but only recently really started bottling their own wines, and they make a fantastic line of rosés. These come from high altitude vineyards. We're talking 1,800 feet in Rioja Alavesa. And this is a blend of Tempranillo, Garnacha, and then this, like we alluded to before, it does have a little bit of Viura in it. And again, this is made in a way such that the grapes are picked and then the Viura is co-fermented or put in a vat with the Tempranillo and Garnacha. So it is a blend of red and white, but it's not a blend of red and white wine. It's a blend of red and white grapes. From vintage to vintage, this one sees some vintage variation at its most compelling, and I think 2017 is a really great example of this. It's like crushed rocks and herbs and just a little bit of kind of tart raspberry fruit, and it's an amazing bottle of wine for $14.
The color is kind of a light carnation, and I love the color variation in Rosé. There's very, very light pink that's a kind of barest color, and you get that like almost deep magenta all the way to that. It doesn't tell you a lot necessarily about the flavor of the wine, like what it's going to taste like.
Sure.
But I love seeing that spectrum. This one is almost floral on the nose.
Yeah, it's so pretty. It's everything you look for in a rosé. I think it's really bats out of its class. Like I said, it's a $14 bottle of wine.
I love the acidity in it.
Yeah, and it's very bright,
mouth-watering,
but it has this kind of mouth-coating minerality to it, which makes it a very, very easy to drink.
Not every grape makes good rosé.
Yeah.
It's just, I find that often, like, higher alcohol wines or wines that are really, 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 really fruity, or grapes that make fruity wine, I should say, don't necessarily result in... I have never had a delicious white Zinfandel, but that does not mean it does not exist.
I have. They're hard to find, and they have to be made deliberately, and I think it's Zinfandel, to me, is one of those grapes that if you're going to make a rosé from it, if you're going to make a white Zinfandel or a rosé of Zinfandel, it really has to be a deliberate choice in the vineyard. I think the compelling examples I've had have been picked to be rosé, not made in the Saignée method or as byproduct of red wine making. I can't think of a grape that I haven't had at least one compelling rosé from. Although there are certain grapes that I think are more, kind of predictably compelling than others. Like Tempranillo, like the one that we just tried, this Ostatu Rosado, I haven't had a ton of great rosé of Tempranillo in my life.
I've had a lot of rosé of Tempranillo, but
yeah, I haven't had a lot that I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go back to, and I can't wait for the next vintage to come out. And this is one of those wines that, again, when you're in the hands of a deliberate, careful winemaker who wants to make a product that is unto itself and not just a byproduct or a cash grab or whatever cynical kind of term you want to put to it. Like, and I think it can be really compelling, and I think this is a great example of that.
I will say, like, having rosés in my cellar, it's wonderful for a couple of reasons. You get access to a winery and a winery's work that maybe I wouldn't otherwise be able to experience, but also there's no pressure to sit on it. And I feel like rosé just says, drink me right now. The nice thing is that you don't have to wait. Like, there's no pressure to wait.
Although I have a theory that you can wait. I'm actually currently aging about a case of rosés, of some of my favorite rosés, and I'm going to open them in 10 years past vintage because I have a theory that deliberately made rosé will age like white wine and will probably be pretty interesting and complex once, because these are pretty high acid wines. And, in the hands of a good winemaker, the acid is really pleasant when it's young, but I have a feeling that, like, I'm thinking of Tempier Bandol, some Basque rosés, Ameztoi, Rubentis, that I'm putting away because I want to see what they're like. Because I have a theory that wisdom can be challenged, and I'm going to do it. And I might be wrong, oftentimes am, but I think some of the higher quality rosés can be aged for the same reason you can age white wine. I mean, you don't have to. They're really delicious young, but I think, for the same, like I said, the same reason you would age a white Burgundy or a Chablis, they take on these really interesting characteristics. And it's not something that, as a wine professional, I've had a chance to do a lot because that's conventional wisdom, is that they don't age.
I am going to be curious in however many years that is.
Maybe that'll be, a podcast of ours in 5 years. We'll revisit the
aged rosé.
Yeah.
Here, Madison, this is a bunch of stuff you can't get anymore.
Rosé number 2?
Yeah, rosé number 2.
Let's do it. So this is one that I'm pretty psyched about too. This is Lioco. This is a kind of one of the new California movement. We talk about this kind of new movement in California wine towards wines of place, wines of balance. And this is a project between a former sommelier at Spago and the Licklider family. And I'm one of my favorite California wineries because they're pretty affordable. This one's $20, and even their high-end stuff is under $40. I mean, they have some more expensive stuff too, but some of their single vineyard stuff is, in the 30s, which for California is pretty reasonable. This is kind of, newly available again. It wasn't available in the market for a while, and I'm really excited to see it back. When they first got introduced, 4 or 5 years ago, we actually did a wine brunch with these guys at Four Quarter, which was might have been one of the most fun wine events I've ever put on. Because, you don't really do wine brunches. You have these dinners where you sit down and it's like course after course of, kind of heavy stuff. And to have this kind of these light, vibrant wines with this food and, Four Quarter in the day is very pretty. It's got a lot of light, and it was a really good time, despite the fact that I had the worst laryngitis. Lioco makes a great rosé. This is a rosé of Old Vine Carignan, planted in the 50s, and again, long-term relationships with the growers, and it's really pretty. And this is actually picked to be rosé. So this is. They made all of the vineyard decisions to make this wine, and I love it. It's got this really great kind of, they call it the eye of the partridge, kind of very faint pink orange color to it.
It's darker in color just by a little bit, but the nose on this has a lot more fruit to it than the Ostatu does. It's a little juicier.
Yeah, and like the fruit is a little bit more tropical without being sweet.
This is from Mendocino County.
Mm-hmm. And like the palate is all unripe strawberry.
It really is.
It's super tart and delicious. This is the first time I've had this vintage. Like, I've not opened a bottle of this yet.
This is delicious.
I'm really, really excited about this wine.
One of the things I love doing is I will go to concerts on the square with friends. And I'm actually kind of, no shade to the chamber orchestra. I love you, chamber orchestra. But I'm generally there for the people and the wine to like sit and have a picnic after work on a Wednesday.
And let's be honest, like, not the optimal listening conditions at concerts on the square. They do, like, there are a lot of great things about it, but acoustics, not in the top 5. So I think we can just stipulate that and move forward.
Yes, keep moving on. I love getting a different bottle of rosé every week. And usually because I'm with a group of people, it's like 3 to 4 bottles of rosé every week. And I like to just try to work through as many rosés as I possibly can. And the great thing is that for $10 or $15, if it's not amazing, everything is fine.
Yep. It's all good. And
yeah.
You just save it for the end.
Yeah.
When it matters less.
I try to go to as many of the rosé tastings as like Square will have or Barriques will have, and I try to go to as many of those kinds of tastings as I possibly can because you can taste the whole range and you can find the 1 or 2 out of the 8 that's going to be amazing at its price point.
Yeah.
I will say one of the challenges with rosé is that it does change so much year to year, and depending on the producer, year to year, I may not know whether it's going to be of good quality. And there will be like a couple of years where it's pretty good, and then one year where it's just really not.
Yeah.
And for me, if the acidity is so harsh, or if it like there's some rosés can get kind of a paint thinner thing going on.
Yeah.
And that's really unpleasant. Or they can just get really thin. And I think sometimes year to year, it can be hard to figure out, okay, this is the deal of the year.
Yeah. Accepting some variation is okay. You know, I think, to me, I trust certain, like Ostatu. Some vintages are really, like, mind-blowingly great. Some are just good, but they're always at least good. And, you know, that's trusting producer and trusting them to make, you know, good decisions in the cellar and in the vineyard, even if it isn't the same as it would have been the previous vintage or 2 vintages ago that you really loved for whatever reason. Figuring out a different way to love it because it's still a carefully made product is, I think, it's a good thing for all of us to do, you know, not get caught, you know, not get stuck into ruts.
For my birthday last year, my friend brought me a Magnum of the Red Car Rosé.
Oh, nice.
And I don't know if you've seen the Red Car Magnums, but they're really, really, really tall.
Yeah, they're like skinny
3
and
feet. Yeah, they're enormous. And so I have a picture of me at my birthday last year just holding up this like massive Magnum of Red Car.
I miss that rosé.
It's a delicious rosé.
It really is.
And it's from Sonoma County.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. There are producers that I go toward, and that is one of them. You mentioned the Txakolina rosé. That's delicious as well. Another like long bottle.
Yeah, the Ameztoi Rubentis is amazing because you don't see a lot of rosé from Basque Country, just because there isn't a ton of red wine grown in that area of the world. There aren't a ton of Basque rosés, but that one is consistently vintage to vintage, and this vintage is so good. It's the 2017 is really, really, really compelling. It's
That's
good.
Awesome. I'm excited to try it. I'm very excited to get launched into rosé season and launched into spring.
I am right behind you.
All right. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks, Lindsay.
This has been The Corner Table, a podcast about food and drink in Madison, produced by the Capital Times. Our music was composed by Patrick Christians. Details about the wines we tasted and mentioned today will be available at captimes.com, and you should be able to find great rosés at Madison wine shops all over town. Follow us on Facebook at Corner Table Podcast, and subscribe to The Corner Table on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. I am your host, Cap Times food writer Lindsay Christians. My wish for you this week is sugar snap peas. I know they're not in season quite yet, but they're so tasty and quick, and I'm craving them anyway. Cheers!